Welcome back to another episode of That's Business. Today's guest is Laura Rizzo. Laura brings maximum effectiveness to clients' performance, well-being, and relationships through her mental fitness coaching. She brings to her practice decades of professional experience as an educator, sports coach, and entrepreneur, complemented by her own unapologetic personal history navigating love, loss, and change. Laura, I'm so pumped to have this conversation because I know it'll be a good one. Before we dive into the greatness that is Love All Coaching, did you always want to be a coach growing up, or what did you want to be when you grew up?
Right. Okay. First of all, I'm super excited for this too. And thank you for having me. So I didn't even know what life coaching was when I was younger. I didn't even know there was such a thing. So no, I did not. When I was younger, I played with my dolls. I loved being like mom to my dolls. I liked playing librarian. Ooh. And I was always super active. So man, I was outside jumping on trampoline for hours, playing it was my I've always been very physical. So it's been like my therapy and whatever. Yeah.
Going into, high school, we get to those teenage years, early 20s. What did we initially start out doing?
So I was a high school Spanish teacher.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I got a major in Spanish literature and language, and I got my secondary teaching certificate at the same time. Now, I didn't know. Okay, I'd always taught tennis. That was like the summer job, right? Make money for college and all that stuff. So I had always been a tennis coach. And I remember thinking when I was younger, like, man, this would be a cool job, just have a job. And I thought, shit, my parents are going to kill me. Go to college, go to K college, and then be like, I think I'm just going to coach tennis. So I remember thinking that, right? But I didn't know. I knew I loved Spanish language. I knew I loved coaching tennis. And so I thought, I'm going to try teaching. And I didn't know until I knew. So I did my student teaching. And when I had that experience, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is it.
This is it. I like it. So how long did we end up being a high school teacher? And I'm guessing obviously tennis coaching aligned with that.
Totally.
But how many years were you in that field?
I taught a total of 5 years. And that doesn't include like going back to school, getting my master's, right? And then coming back out and teaching again. And then once I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, then I stepped down from teaching in the classroom. And it just kind of happened that I made it happen, but also that I focused more on teaching tennis. So luckily, when I was in high school and they wanted me to be the tennis coach, they paid half for me to get my pro certification.
Ooh.
So I'm so glad and grateful to them. Yeah, that I had that USPTA, because once we moved back to this area, I could contact local clubs and say, hey, I'm a certified tennis pro. Do you need help? So that was the segue there.
Okay. So we have young kiddos at home. We stepped away a little bit. Then what did we do?
So then we ended up becoming a business woman, an entrepreneur. So I ended up taking over the community tennis program for the tennis company where I worked. And with their blessing, they were like, look, you're doing everything anyhow. You're doing a great job. You run with it. And so it was just kind of perfect timing. I'm like, yeah. So that's how Love All Tennis came about. So that was like huge learning curve because I had to do my accounting, my market, everything, right? So, but great learning for me. And I really loved managing a team. I loved coaching other coaches. That was super fulfilling. And I was able to do that around my kids' schedule. So I could also be mom at home too.
Wow. And where does the name Love All come from?
That's a good question. I remember I'm seeing myself writing in my house and I was coming up with a company name. Okay, here it is. Love All in tennis is 0-0, right? Everybody begins at Love All. So it's said all the time, love all before each game. So it was a tennis term. And I loved the idea of loving all people, of making tennis accessible to all people with differences. I had created an adaptive tennis class. I just love the idea of it not being just for the people who can afford tennis, right? Historically, but for everybody, the community. And then I love all kinds of tennis. So I was like, oh, that's my company name. And I wanted to do LOVE all, but I hadn't decided. My family, we had gone to church that morning. I came back and when I looked it up, that domain was gone. And so then I was like, oh, LUV was not gone. So that's how it's LUV, all tennis.
I love that. And at what point did we decide to get into the additional coaching business, and what kind of happened during that time, if you feel comfortable sharing, of where you had this idea to transition into something else?
Yeah. So flash forward several years, and I had hired my own life coach, which I didn't even know what life coaches were. What had happened was I was recovering from a relationship where my partner had secrets and was unfaithful, and it rocked my world. So I created Team Laura. So I had my therapist, and then I was talking to a friend of mine. There were a few people that I could discuss my situation with, that I felt safe discussing it with, right? So there's a dear friend I'd known since I was 3 years old, lived out east, and we were talking, and I'd read her post. We connected through Facebook. I'd read her post about her divorce, and the way she handled it was with such grace. I was like, wow. I'm like, I got to talk to her. So I did. And she goes, you got to call Andrea. I'm like, who's Andrea? She goes, she's a life coach. I'm like, well, what is that? So she started describing it. I'm like, is it like a therapist? She's like, no, just call her. She'll do a free session with you. You'll love her. She's amazing. I'm like, okay, well, I think I'm fine for now. It's okay. Well, 6 months later, I was not so fine. So I did call Andrea, and we had a session, chemistry session. Some people call it that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm hiring you. I still work with her to this day. So yeah, I think it was my own experiences working with a life coach. And then I was getting very burnt out with the tennis, running the tennis business. It was so much, Angela. I was managing several sites, and it was a lot, and I was ready for something else. And so during one of my coaching sessions, life coaching sessions, I said, you know what I really want to do? The coaching I really want to be doing. She's like, what? I said, this coaching. And so she's like, I'm taking off my coaching hat. She's like, yes. So we talked. I'm like, well, where do I start? So she says, I recommend you start with Coactive Training Institute. They're really reputable, rigorous coaching training company. Take the fundamentals. It's an exposure to all the different modalities. See what you think. So I did. I went to Chicago. Oh, by the way, COVID was hitting around this time.
Oh.
So it was kind of perfect time because I didn't know whether I'd be able to do the tennis or not.
Right.
And so I thought, well, okay, in the meantime, I'm going to look into this because long term, I don't want to be, 70 some years old and grinding out 8 hours on a tennis court. Like already after every season, I had to recover physically from some injury. So anyhow, I went to fundamentals, and I sat down there in Chicago with maybe 20 other people. And I'm like, within minutes, I'm like, these are my people. This is it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Where did this idea, because that's a big freaking leap. Like, tennis is comfortable. You've made a very successful business.
Yeah.
You go to this institute, and I feel the same way. Any training, it's like, yeah, I got this. Hell yeah, this is easy. So how did you keep up that momentum and now transitioning into starting your own business? And yes, there's relatively the same like fundamentals, but it's totally different.
Yeah. So I took all of the courses from fundamentals, right? And then I could have stopped there, but I was loving it. And they require you right out of the gate, like start coaching people. And it's like, what? They're like, yeah. And then at a certain point, they're like, just, you got to charge something, charge $10, whatever, but start coaching people, get experience. And so I loved it. And then there was a certification process, another like 6 months of certification, which was super rigorous. And I just loved it so much. I was like, I'm going for it. And then during that time, I found the mental fitness coaching. And that was where, so for me personally, the mental fitness coaching in conjunction with the therapy that I was doing, which was EMDR for trauma and anxiety and what have you, those two was like magic for me. And so I got more involved in this mental fitness coaching. And I'm like, this is where it's at, man, because we can have lots of insights about our behaviors, about relationships, about whatever. Having insight doesn't change it. Reading a book doesn't change it. It doesn't change your behavior. And you cannot out analyze trauma. And so for me, when I was doing this mental fitness for myself, it's become my lifestyle. It's just what I do. And I want to empower others in this way so that they are doing the healing work, the revealing of their true selves. They are really going back in and reconnecting. Like, the most important relationship is with yourself. Life is so relational, and how you treat yourself has everything to do with how you are in relationship with other people. And so for me, that's just been a huge part of my own journey of healing and recovering, my own recovery.
What is the difference between mental fitness coaching in regard to, a typical therapist, a life coach? How is this different?
Yes, great question. We kind of define mental fitness as handling life's challenges, circumstances, the people with a positive mindset versus a negative. And so this involves, number one, being aware. There's awareness. It's an active process, which is where I really see the difference. So the first step is being aware of where do we get in our own ways, right? Beginning with the self-critic that we all have, all the shooting on ourselves, right? We judge others. We judge circumstances. I would be happy if only this situation were different, right? Yeah, you've been there.
Yeah.
Right? And all the ways we get in our own way, and especially with this area around secrecy and addictions and stuff like that. Man, if you want to talk about a field day for your saboteurs, there it is. Right? Like, first blaming yourself. How could I not have known? Then you blame the person who's, they're in their own struggle with whatever it is. And then maybe you want to avoid it. Nothing going on here, nothing to see here. Right? Or you want to be a pleaser and you want to fix that person or what have you. So there's nothing like something like that happening to really awaken all of that in you. And so having a practice where you become aware of it, you can name it. Oh, this is this part of me. It's not my true authentic self. It's a part of me. What's it trying to tell me, to protect me from, to teach me? And then what choice can I make which really serves myself and this relationship or, the other people involved? It's a practice, just like physical fitness. So what I love about it is not just talk therapy. It's not just talking about things. It's doing it. It's catching these voices, going inside the body, really taking control of your mind. Go inside your body, get present. And then what choice are you going to make from that space? And there's all these different powers that we call. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yes, of course you're making sense. So to simplify, because I actually had never heard of saboteurs until meeting you and Tiffany, a previous guest on this podcast, was raving about your services and what saboteurs were with mental fitness coaching. So for those that may be listening and don't know what that looks like, how does that go together? Or who needs this? Which we know the answer is everyone. Fun fact.
Yeah, who needs it? Everybody. I'm really glad that you asked that because it reminds me to speak about the saboteurs more as our friends instead of something we're trying to reject. So as a coach, I frame it as they're actually your strengths, that they just get overused, right? So if you tell me like one of your strengths, I could probably guess what your saboteurs are and vice versa. So people ask, well, like, how do we get these? Am I born like that? Or is it my childhood? Is it my parents' fault?
Always the parents.
It's always the parents, especially the mom, right?
Yes.
So anyhow, I say yes and yes. It's a mixture. We're born with certain proclivities, certain inclinations towards behaviors, right? Then also life happens. And to survive what happens in life, we use our strengths. And then they get us through that part of our life, our training ground, our childhood. And then as adults, it's become habitual, that way of responding. That's when it can get in our way because we no longer actually need that. So it's about going back and using it from a place of strength where it serves us and not overusing that skill.
It's interesting too, because there is an assessment that Laura does and it's awesome and you should do it. So when I did it, it was interesting to see how those come into play on things, because I forget what it's called. And I always forget what my one I scored 0 on, but it was essentially delegation or something along those lines. Because every business coach is like, you should delegate more. You should do that. And I'm like, I scored 0 on this test that was very intricate. Like, I don't have that problem. So it's interesting because it validated how I was feeling. And it was like, I'm a horoscope girly, as you know, but
yeah,
it almost like validated how I was feeling. And just like, yeah, your strength, like you said, is, one of my strengths is I'm great at building relationships. I mean, you and I walked up to each other, still haven't figured out how we knew each other, or maybe in a past life, but
totally.
It's interesting because it validates, and it's like you said, not a weakness, but more of a strength. And it was great proof to show someone that's trying to, and I hate the fields we're in and the fact that everyone wants to be a coach, and there's a lot of negative light on it when there's badass coaches like us that do this. So,
right.
Sorry, I got on a tangent, but it's so cool what you do.
So I'm thinking it was probably the controller, right? Because many entrepreneurs, so there's strengths in having a controller, right? You get shit done, man, right? You organize stuff, you get shit done, and that's great. So let's have what we call the sage sides of our brain do it versus that on hyperdrive means nobody else gets to do anything and your way is always the right. And they have a hard time delegating. So people who overuse that skill, and that's when it gets in the way, right? So we look at, all right, well, let's draw back here, step back and see how we can use it as a strength again.
Right. And it's very interesting. So do you have a certain group of people you like to work with, a certain demographic, or outside of the mental fitness coaching that everyone can use, for more on like that grief, loss, going through those pieces, who do you really help in that regard?
So particularly in times of transition, such as people becoming empty nesters, like what's my next now, right? And divorced women. I mean, I got a little experience with that, having been divorced twice, kind of an expert.
Expert here.
But really, I have this program I'm developing, Zen and the Art of Divorce.
Ooh!
Because it doesn't have to be tortuous and brutal. And it can actually be a Zen experience, and use it as your launch pad. How's the saying go? We grow through what we go through, right? I want women to know that they're not alone if they are in a situation where they're having relationship issues, right? Perhaps they've discovered their partner's secret life. They do not have to do it alone, and they can get support with that. Yeah, so really supporting spouses with their partner's addiction, right? The negative self-talk that can go on, like I was saying before, like addressing that and being able to put it in perspective and all of that is huge. Having them be able to move forward.
Right. What would you say are some of the most common but problems women especially face when they're going through divorce that you support them on?
Oh, goodness. One of the big things is just going over and over and over. And what could have I done differently? And what could have, that it's sort of like, it's torturous, right? Did I make the right choice? So you could understand, right, how in that situation of change, because any change, and that's where we all get activated, how that judge can come out, the self-critical voice can come out, and blaming the soon-to-be ex or the ex, right? All these things that just make it so much worse, right? It's important to be with the feelings. And I want to be really clear about that. We're not talking about toxic positivity, like, oh yeah, okay, just put on a smiley face, let's move on. Yeah, no. Feel the feels, right? That's one of the things I love doing too as part of my mental fitness coaching is embodiment. Where you get out of the head into the body, where is that feeling in the body? What's it feel like? What's that sensation? What is the felt sensation of sadness, right? Of rage, and giving expression to that, right? Giving people full permission to have their feelings, not keep the hand on the hot stove and sit in it. But we naturally know when it's time to get out of that feeling. And often it's after we've allowed ourselves to feel it. Now we can move through it and go to the other side.
Oof, that's so powerful. For those of you that are listening, want to work with Laura, please head to the show notes. But Laura, as we wrap this up, what advice do you have for listeners?
Well, it's funny. You mentioned the saboteur assessment. So it's actually, I have a new format for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Take the saboteur assessment. See what resonates with you, what doesn't, right? See what are the ways that you could get in your own way in terms of your wellness, performance, and relationships, because it applies to all of it, right? And then book a free call with me.
Ooh, amazing.
Book a free call. We'll go over the results. They're super fun. I always learn from doing them. More importantly, the potential client learns and gains a lot of insight. Like, oh, man, it's so cool. The light bulbs go off. They're like, okay.
Ooh,
right?
Feeling called out here. Yes. Amazing. So if you want to take that assessment, like I mentioned, head to the show notes, book a call with Laura. Thank you again. You have been incredible. I enjoy every interaction we have together. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Me too. I love your energy and you're about spreading this to the world, right? These positive things.
You have to do it. I mean, we're all in our own heads, like you say. As someone that's been having not a great mental health week, I'm like, this is what I needed, is to talk to you today. So works out.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. So those of you listening, head to the show notes and tune in again next week for another episode of That's Business.
If you're looking for a career change and you're not sure where to start, the Resume Rescue can help. Sure, there's no such thing as the perfect fit for everyone, but here at the Resume Rescue, we're on a mission to find the perfect solution for you. Whether it's changing careers, updating a resume, learning LinkedIn, or practicing interviewing, we have you covered. Find us online at theresumerescue.com and find all of our contact info in our show notes.